My name is Mia, I'm 27, and my Golden Girl sister and her fiancé demanded my inheritance for their wedding. When my parents sided with them, I didn't argue. But after they humiliated me publicly, I revealed a secret that left them scrambling to pick up the pieces. Before I tell you exactly how I did it, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It all came to a head in the suffocating quiet of my parents' living room, with the ugly truth splashed across a 65-inch television screen for everyone to see. But the real beginning, the moment the tide truly turned, was on a Tuesday night. I was sitting in my dimly lit apartment, feeling the kind of bone-deep loneliness that makes you question every decision you've ever made. That's when the email arrived. It was anonymous, with no subject line, just a single, ominous attachment and a sentence that would become my mantra: the truth will set you free. My hand, I remember, was trembling so badly I could barely control the mouse. I clicked. The file opened, and the world tilted on its axis. My breath, which I hadn't realized I was holding, escaped in a ragged, painful gasp. It was all there. Everything. The shock was a physical blow, a bucket of ice water that washed away months of accumulated pain, doubt, and grief. In its place, something cold, hard, and terrifyingly clear began to form. I leaned back in my chair, the frantic, panic thumping in my chest slowing to a steady, heavy, determined beat. It was the rhythm of a war drum. I looked at the screen, at the irrefutable proof of their calculated deception, and I whispered into the empty room, the words tasting like metal on my tongue: "Game over, Lily." To understand how a family gets to that point, you have to understand the roles we were assigned at birth. In the story of our family, there were two daughters, me, the reliable backdrop, and Lily, the star of the show. She was 2 years younger, and it felt like she'd been born shining, sucking all the light and air in every room she entered. She was the beautiful one, the charming one, the one who could cry on cue and have the world handed to her on a silver platter. I was the quiet one. The responsible one. The one who got straight A's, worked after school, and learned early on that my needs were flexible. Negotiable. Our parents owned a small, beloved bakery in town, a place that always smelled of warm bread and melting sugar. It was the heart of our childhood, but for me, it was also my first job. From the time I was 14, my weekends were spent with hands covered in flour, my back aching from lifting heavy trays, all to save up for things I wanted. I remember when I was 16, I'd spent an entire summer working double shifts, meticulously saving every dollar for a prestigious graphic design camp that I believed would be my ticket to a real career. I had the brochure taped to my bedroom mirror. I had just enough saved when Lily, then 14, decided her social survival depended on owning a ludicrously expensive designer handbag. The tantrum was biblical. There were tears, slammed doors, and accusations that I was a heartless, jealous sister who wanted to see her miserable. The pressure from my parents was immediate and suffocating. I can still hear my mother's voice, that gentle, disappointed tone that was more effective than any shouting. "Mia, you're the stronger one," she'd said, her hand on my arm, a gesture meant to be comforting but felt like a shackle. "You can always earn more money. It's just so important to keep the peace in the family." Peace. That was the word they always used. But their peace felt like my surrender. I gave Lily the money. I watched her unbox the purse on social media, basking in the adoration of her friends. And I stayed home that summer, tearing the brochure off my mirror. That was the unspoken contract of our family: I would sacrifice, Lily would receive, and my parents would call it peace. The only person who ever seemed to read the fine print of that contract was my grandfather. He was a man of few words, a retired carpenter who saw the world in straight lines and solid foundations. He saw the cracks in ours. When he was dying, he called me to his bedside. The air in the room was thick with the smell of antiseptic and the quiet hum of machines. He pressed a small, worn wooden box into my hands. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, were the legal documents for a trust fund. My inheritance. It wasn't a king's ransom, but it was the sum of a lifetime of quiet, steady work. It was enough to change a life. Enough for a down payment on a house, enough to start the design agency I sketched out in notebooks late at night. His grip was surprisingly strong. "This isn't just money, Mia," he'd whispered, his voice raspy. "It's a chance. Your chance. Don't let your good heart be mistaken for a weak spine." As he spoke, his gaze flickered to the corner of the room where Lily was taking a selfie, adjusting her hair in the reflection of the darkened window. He saw it all. He knew who I needed protection from. The terms of the trust were his final act of protection. I couldn't access the principal until I turned 30. For years, that knowledge was a quiet comfort, a secret promise that my future was my own. My cousin Clara was my only other anchor to reality. She was the one who saw the family dynamic for what it was. She was the one who called me after the first major blow-up, her voice a low, furious hum over the phone. "I just got off the phone with Aunt Carol," she'd said, not even bothering with a hello. The things she said. "Mia, she's just parroting Lily's nonsense. Don't you dare listen to them. You are not selfish. You are being targeted." Her validation was a lifeline. In the storm that was coming, she was the only lighthouse I had. And the storm broke, as they so often do, over a celebratory dinner. Lily had gotten engaged to Ethan. He was the kind of man who wore his family's money like a well-tailored suit, effortlessly and with an air of absolute entitlement. They were a perfect, terrifying match. The entire meal was a performance of their future glory. A destination wedding in Tuscany. A honeymoon in the Maldives. A starter home in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. It was a fantasy spun from gold, and apparently, I was expected to finance it. Lily chose her moment perfectly, right after the dessert plates were cleared. She turned to me, her eyes wide and sparkling with what I now know was pure, predatory calculation. And of course, she began, her voice a silken purr, "It would be so amazing to have the whole family truly invest in our future." Ethan, her perfect accomplice, placed a proprietary hand on her arm. "We were thinking, Mia, that your trust fund would be the perfect wedding gift. A real statement of family support. A way to show you're really behind us." The air left my lungs. It was so brazen, so utterly shameless, that my brain couldn't process it for a moment. I remember the clink of my spoon against my plate, the only sound in the sudden silence. I managed to stammer something about the rules of the trust, about my age, about the plans I had for my own future, for my own career. Lily just smiled, a tight, pitying smile. "Plans can change, silly," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "This is about family. About our future." My parents sat frozen, their own smiles strained, plastered on their faces. They were terrified of the scene, of the disruption to their precious peace. The no I managed to get out that night was quiet, couched in apologies and explanations, but it was a no nonetheless. I thought, with staggering naivety, that it would be the end of it. It wasn't. It was the first shot fired in a war I didn't even know I was fighting. That single word, no, transformed me from a sister into an obstacle. The campaign against me started subtly. It began with my friend, Sarah. We'd been inseparable since middle school, the kind of friends who finished each other's sentences. I ran to her after that disastrous dinner, sobbing in her kitchen, pouring out my fear and confusion. I told her everything, how cornered I felt, how I was terrified this would destroy my family, how sometimes the inheritance felt more like a burden than a gift. She held me, rocked me while I cried, and told me to stay strong. She said I was her hero for standing up for myself. She was my most trusted confidant. 2 weeks later, I was summoned to another family meeting. It was an ambush. I walked into the living room to find them all waiting for me, a panel of judges ready to deliver my sentence. Lily started, her eyes already brimming with perfectly formed tears. "I just don't understand why you hate me so much, Mia," she choked out. "You're making this so difficult. Even Sarah is worried about you. She told me you feel burdened by the money, that you think it's a curse." The world went silent. It felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. She was using my own words, my deepest fears, spoken in what I thought was the safest space I had. She had twisted my vulnerability into a weapon and was now using it to stab me in front of our parents. I looked at Sarah's name hanging in the air between us and felt a betrayal so sharp it was hard to breathe. I looked at my parents, desperately hoping they would see the cruelty, the blatant manipulation. But all they saw was their golden girl, heartbroken. All they heard was that I was unhappy, and that my unhappiness was making Lily sad. My dad cleared his throat, his face a mask of paternal disappointment. "Mia, this has gone on long enough. Your sister is getting married. This is supposed to be the happiest time of her life, and you are casting a shadow over it." My mom jumped in, her voice trembling with emotion. "We have always been a family that supports each other. Your grandfather, he would have wanted you to help your sister. He loved family above all else. That was it. That was the line. Using him, the one person who had tried to protect me, to try and break me." The rage that had been simmering for years began to boil. It was a hot, terrifying feeling that crawled up my neck and made my hands clench into fists at my sides. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. I wanted to tell them about every sacrifice, every time I had stepped back so Lily could step forward. But I didn't. I just stood there, a statue carved from ice and fury. The final blow, the ultimatum, came from my father. He stood up, his posture rigid, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. "This is the last time we are having this discussion. Either you agree to sit down with a lawyer and figure out a way to help your sister, or you can consider yourself no longer a part of this family." The silence that followed was absolute. Lily, through her fake tears, shot me a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. Ethan looked smug, like a man who had just closed a very profitable deal. My parents looked pained, yes, but resolute. They had drawn their line in the sand. They had made their choice. And in that moment, staring into the faces of the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, so did I. I met each of their gazes. The pain in my chest was a physical thing, a crushing weight that threatened to suffocate me. But underneath it, something else was happening. The soft, pliable parts of my heart were hardening. Resolve. I straightened my spine. My voice, when it came out, was eerily calm. "I understand," I said. And I turned, walked out the door, and didn't look back. The days that followed were a masterclass in isolation. It wasn't just silence, it was a deliberate, weaponized absence. I was erased. My calls went to voicemail. My texts were left unread. It was as if the Mia they had known for 27 years had simply ceased to exist. I would come home from work to my small, quiet apartment, and the silence would press in on me, amplifying every doubt, every fear. I started questioning my own sanity. Was I the selfish one? Was I the one destroying the family over money? The gaslighting had been so effective for so long that I couldn't trust my own judgment. I found myself sitting at my laptop one night, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, typing trust fund lawyer and early withdrawal penalties into the search bar. The thought was a venomous whisper in my mind, just give them some of it. Not all of it. Just a piece. Buy them back. Buy the peace. Isn't that what you've always done? Isn't that your job in this family? I felt myself starting to break. The loneliness was a physical ache, a constant companion. I was grieving the loss of my family while they were still alive, and the pain was unbearable. I actually drafted an email to one of the lawyers I found, my words stilted and formal, asking about the legal possibilities of restructuring the trust. My finger hovered over the send button for a full 10 minutes. This was it. This was the moment of my surrender. But then, I looked over at my bookshelf and saw the small wooden box my grandfather had given me. It was simple, unadorned, but it felt like the most solid thing in my life. I thought of his words, "Don't let your good heart be mistaken for a weak spine." Was this what he had feared? That they would use my love for them, my desire for family, to break my spine? With a surge of something that felt like a mixture of grief and defiance, I slammed my laptop shut. I would not break. That was the night the email arrived. The notification pinged, and in my fragile state, the sound made me jump. I almost deleted it. But the subject line was blank, and something about that felt intentional. I opened it. "The truth will set you free." And below it, the attachment. My world, which had been shrinking in gray, exploded into sharp, brutal color. They were screenshots. Dozens of them. A whole secret history of the past few months, told in Lily's own words. They were texts she had sent to her inner circle. I scrolled, my breath catching in my throat, each message a fresh stab of betrayal. There were messages bragging about her genius plan to secure her wedding bonus. There were detailed accounts of how she was manipulating our parents, playing the victim to perfection. "Mom and Dad are totally falling for it," one text read, punctuated with a string of laughing emojis. "They're my best weapon. They'll wear Mia down for me. It's only a matter of time before the pushover caves." Another thread was about me, about my life's dream. "Her sad little hobby of opening a design studio can wait," she had typed. My wedding is obviously the priority. She needs to get her priorities straight. But the worst one, the one that made my blood run cold, was a response to a friend who asked if she felt guilty. Guilty? Why would I feel guilty? Lily had written. That inheritance should have been split from the start. She doesn't deserve it more than I do. I'm just taking back what's rightfully mine. Rightfully hers. The entitlement was breathtaking. The cold, calculated cruelty of it all laid bare. It wasn't an emotional plea from a stressed-out bride. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a premeditated, long-term campaign of emotional warfare designed to rob me. The anonymous sender, I realized, didn't matter. It could have been a friend of hers with a flicker of conscience. It could have been Ethan, getting cold feet and creating an exit strategy. What mattered was the truth. It was a bitter, ugly poison, but it was also the antidote. The despair I'd been drowning in was cauterized by a white-hot rage. The girl who had almost surrendered just minutes before was gone. In her place was a woman with a weapon. The next morning, I picked up my phone. My hand was perfectly steady. My voice, when I spoke to my mother, was calm, measured, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Mom," I said. "I've been thinking. You're right. I've been selfish." I could hear the audible sigh of relief on the other end of the line. "Oh, Mia, I'm so glad. I knew you'd come around. I knew you'd do the right thing for your sister. Let's all meet at your house this Saturday," I continued, my voice smooth as glass. "I'll bring the necessary paperwork from my lawyer. We can sign everything and finally put this all behind us." The trap was set. The bait was taken. Walking into my parents' house that Saturday felt like stepping onto a stage. The set was the living room, a place that held 27 years of my memories, Christmas mornings, birthday parties, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. Now, it was a theater for the final act of this tragedy. They were all there, arranged like a royal court awaiting my tribute. Lily and Ethan were on the love seat, hands clasped, the very picture of a couple in love. Lily was practically vibrating with smug triumph, a glow about her that had nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with victory. My parents were flitting about, their movements jerky and overly cheerful, offering me drinks, asking about my week, their relief so palpable it was suffocating. The air was thick with the cloying sweetness of their denial. On the polished surface of the coffee table sat a thick, leather-bound folder. The legal documents. Prepared by Ethan's high-powered family lawyer, ready for my signature to transfer a significant portion of my future into their hands. I'm so glad you decided to stop being so dramatic, sis, Lily said, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. She stood to hug me, an actress playing the part of the forgiving sister. I took a half step back, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but she felt it. A flicker of annoyance crossed her perfect face before she masked it with another brilliant smile. We knew you loved us too much to hold out, my mom said, patting my arm with a trembling hand. My dad nodded, his expression grave. This is for the best, Mia. Family first. Always. They kept repeating that phrase, family first, as if it were an incantation that could magically erase the past few months of cruelty and coercion. Ethan, ever the businessman, pushed the folder across the table toward me. It's all pretty standard, he said, his tone casual, as if they were discussing the weather. It just authorizes the trustee to transfer a portion of the assets to a new joint account for me and Lily upon your 30th birthday. Simple. I didn't look at the folder. I didn't look at the pen they had so thoughtfully placed beside it. Instead, I let my gaze travel slowly around the room, meeting the eyes of each of my accusers, my judges, my family. Before I sign anything, I said, my voice quiet but carrying an unnatural weight that made them all fall silent. I think it's important that we are all completely transparent. I want us all to see what this family support really looks like, in black and white. A nervous energy rippled through the room. Lily's smile tightened at the edges. I took out my phone. My movements were slow, deliberate. I tapped the screen, connecting it to their smart TV via Bluetooth. The huge screen that usually showed my dad's football games flickered to life, mirroring my phone's display. Then, I opened my photo gallery. The first screenshot appeared. It was massive, filling the screen, the words sharp and undeniable. It was Lily's text, Mom and Dad are eating it up. They'll break her down for me. A collective, sharp intake of breath. Lily's face, which had been glowing with triumph, turned the color of chalk. What is that? She stammered, her voice suddenly small. Mia, what are you doing? Turn it off. I ignored her. I swiped. The next screenshot filled the screen. My naive pushover of a sister actually thinks this is about family support. Swipe. She has no idea I've already picked out the car I'm buying with her money. Swipe. Her sad little hobby of a business can wait. My wedding is more important. Swipe. 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 Each message was a hammer blow, shattering the carefully constructed facade of their family portrait. The room was deathly quiet, the only sound the soft, methodical tap of my finger on the glass screen as I presented exhibit after exhibit of her treachery. Lily finally broke. She let out a strangled, animalistic cry and lunged for the TV remote, fumbling with the buttons. It's fake. She faked all of it. She's a liar. She's just jealous, she's always been jealous. She's trying to ruin my life, she shrieked, her voice pitching higher and higher with hysteria. But her denials were pathetic, drowned out by the mountain of her own words on the screen. I saw my mother's hand fly to her mouth, a choked sob escaping. My father just stared, his face a gray mask of disbelief and horror. It was as if he was seeing his beloved daughter for the very first time, and the image was monstrous. But my eyes were on Ethan. He hadn't moved a muscle. He wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was looking at Lily, his fiancé. And the expression on his face was not anger. It was not hurt. It was a chilling, detached disgust. He was looking at a bad investment. The golden girl, the star of the show, was not just tarnished. She was utterly, irrevocably destroyed, and her downfall was being broadcast in high definition in her parents' living room. The silence that descended after the last screenshot faded from the screen was a living thing. It was thick and heavy, filled with the ghosts of every lie, every manipulation, every casual act of cruelty. Lily's frantic denials had dissolved into ragged, ugly sobs. She was curled on the couch, a crumpled version of her former self, but there was no pity in the room for her. Ethan was the first to break the spell. He stood up, his movements stiff and precise. He smoothed down his expensive jacket, a man composing himself after witnessing something distasteful. He looked down at the weeping woman who, just minutes before, had been his future wife. "I'm done here," he said. The words were quiet, almost casual, but they landed with the finality of a guillotine. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't demand an explanation. He simply turned his back on her, on us, and walked to the front door. The decisive click of the latch shutting behind him was the sound of Lily's carefully constructed world imploding. A divorce before the wedding invitations had even been sent. My mother was openly weeping now, not the performative tears of her favored daughter, but the harsh, gut-wrenching sobs of a woman confronting her own catastrophic failure as a parent. My father looked like a hollowed-out version of himself. He finally turned to me, his eyes swimming with a shame so profound it was painful to witness. "Mia," he began, his voice a hoarse whisper. We are so sorry. We didn't know." I held up a hand, not out of anger, but out of sheer exhaustion. "You didn't want to know," I said, my voice flat. "That's the truth of it. You chose what was easy over what was right. You chose her beautiful lies over my ugly truth. You've been making that choice for 27 years." I looked over at Lily, still sobbing on the couch. There was no sense of victory, no triumphant satisfaction. There was just a vast, aching emptiness where my love for my sister had once lived. "I need space," I told my parents, my voice gaining a strength I didn't know I possessed. "Real space. Don't call me. Don't text me. Don't try to fix this. When I'm ready, if I'm ever ready, I will be the one to reach out." I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the thick, leather-bound folder. The weight of the documents felt obscene. I walked to the fireplace, which was dark and cold in the middle of the afternoon, and I dropped the entire folder onto the grate. The sound of the heavy paper hitting the iron was loud in the silent room. It was a final, symbolic rejection of their terms, of their version of family. Then, I turned and walked out the same door Ethan had. I didn't run. I didn't slam it. I simply closed it gently behind me, shutting them in with the wreckage they had created. As I got into my car and drove away from the house I grew up in, I didn't cry. A strange sense of lightness was spreading through my chest. I was leaving behind the only family I had ever known, but for the first time in my entire life, I felt completely and utterly free. A year can feel like a lifetime. The first few months were defined by a profound and necessary silence. I threw myself into my work, using long hours and tight deadlines as a shield against the pain. I found a good therapist, someone who helped me unpack 27 years of learned behavior, of prioritizing everyone's peace above my own well-being. I reconnected with Clara, and our bond solidified into the kind of sisterhood I had always craved but never had. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to rebuild not just my life, but myself. I made a conscious decision not to touch the trust fund. It had been the source of so much pain, and I needed to prove to myself, and to the memory of my grandfather, that my success was not dependent on it. My freelance graphic design business grew. I took on every project, big or small, and poured my heart into it. Client by client, referral by referral, I built a reputation for being creative, reliable, and professional. I saved every penny. The day I signed the lease on a small, sun-drenched studio space in the Arts District, I cried. They were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. It was mine. I had built it. About 6 months after the implosion, a letter arrived. It was a simple, plain card. Inside, in my mother's familiar handwriting, were just 10 words: "We are so sorry. We are so proud of you." It wasn't enough to heal everything, not even close. But it was a start. I didn't call them. But I didn't throw the card away. I put it in the old wooden box with my grandfather's papers. I learned through Clara, in piecemeal updates, what had become of Lily. She had moved to a different state, unable to face the fallout in our small town. Her glamorous engagement was a distant memory, her fair-weather friends had vanished, and her reputation was in tatters. She was working a retail job, paying her own rent for the first time in her life. The golden girl was living in the real world, and it wasn't glittering. Hearing this brought me no pleasure, only a profound sense of sadness for the sister I once had, and the woman she had chosen to become. The real turning point for me, the moment I knew I had truly healed, came on the anniversary of my grandfather's death. I was thinking about him, about his quiet strength, about his final gift to me. The inheritance wasn't meant to be a treasure to be hoarded or fought over. It was meant to be a seed. I met with a lawyer, my lawyer, this time, and we drew up the papers to create a foundation. I used the annual interest from the trust, along with a percentage of my own business profits, to establish the grandfather's legacy grant. It was a fund designed to give small, no-strings-attached grants to young women in my community who had a business plan and a dream, but no access to capital. The launch event was a modest affair, held in my new studio. The room was filled with the warm buzz of conversation from clients, friends, and the first 3 nervous, excited grant recipients. As I stood up to speak, to share my story and my grandfather's vision, I saw them. Standing hesitantly at the back of the room, looking out of place and deeply uncertain, were my parents. They hadn't told me they were coming. They just stood there, watching me, their faces a complex tapestry of pride, regret, and awe. Our relationship is still a work in progress. It's a delicate, fragile thing. The trust that was so carelessly shattered is being pieced back together, shard by painful shard. But now, it's being rebuilt on a new foundation of mutual respect, not my silent sacrifice. Today, my life is full in a way I never imagined possible. My business is thriving. I spend my weekends mentoring the young women who have received the grant, helping them navigate the treacherous waters of entrepreneurship. I am surrounded by a family of my own choosing, people who value me for my mind and my heart, not for what they can take from me. Sometimes, when I'm in my studio late at night, the city lights twinkling outside my window, I'll look at the framed photo of my grandfather on my desk. He's smiling, a gentle, knowing smile. And I can still hear his voice, a quiet whisper across the years, "Don't let your good heart be mistaken for a weak spine." I didn't. I finally learned that a boundary is not a wall to keep people out, it's a line drawn in the sand to protect the person you are. I protected his legacy, and in doing so, I finally, truly, claimed my own. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I feel like it's important to talk about these things. Has anyone in your life ever underestimated you, only to be shocked by your strength? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more. It really helps the channel and lets me know you want to hear more stories like this one.